I've pet sat for neighbors before. It's easy money. You feed the dog, take it for a walk, maybe watch some TV on someone else's couch. Nothing about it has ever scared me. Not once. Until last October, when I agreed to watch my neighbor Corinne's golden retriever for 4 days while she visited her sister in Portland. Corinne lives 3 houses down from me in a quiet neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio. Nice street. Older homes, big yards, lots of trees. She's lived there for about 12 years, and I've known her for 5 of those. She's reliable, normal, the kind of neighbor who brings you soup when you're sick. She handed me a spare key, left me a handwritten list of instructions for her dog, Biscuit, and drove away Friday morning around 9. The first day was completely fine. Biscuit is a calm dog, 7 years old, a little gray around the muzzle. He ate his food, we went for a walk. I watched a movie on Corinne's couch and called it a night around 11. Nothing off. Nothing strange. Just a quiet house and a sleepy dog. Saturday was when things started to feel different. I came over around noon to feed Biscuit his lunch, and the dog wouldn't eat. He just sat in the kitchen doorway and stared down the hallway toward the back of the house. I didn't think much of it at first. Dogs get weird sometimes. I freshened his water, checked the back door to make sure it was locked, and left. But when I came back that evening, Biscuit was in the exact same spot, sitting in that doorway, staring down that same hallway. His food from lunch was untouched. I crouched down next to him and looked down the hall. Nothing. Just a closed bathroom door, and the door to Corinne's bedroom also closed. I walked the whole house, checked every room. Everything was exactly as it should have been. I finally got Biscuit to eat by sitting on the floor next to his bowl and staying with him the whole time. But even as he ate, his eyes kept drifting back toward that hallway. That night, I decided to sleep there instead of going home. I didn't want to leave him alone when he was clearly stressed about something. I sat up on the couch with a blanket and fell asleep around midnight. I woke up at around 2 a.m. I woke up because of a smell. That's the only way I can describe it. It was a thick, heavy smell, like something damp and organic. Like wet soil and something else underneath it I couldn't name. It was strong enough to pull me out of a sleep. Biscuit was not on the couch next to me where he'd been when I fell asleep. I sat up and looked around the room. He was back in the kitchen doorway. Same position, same direction. I got up and walked to the hallway. I stood there for a solid minute, just listening. The house was silent except for the refrigerator hum and the sound of Biscuit's slow breathing. I told myself it was probably a dead animal under the crawl space. Old houses do that. Something gets in, doesn't get out. But I couldn't shake the smell, and I couldn't shake the feeling that followed it. I opened Corinne's bedroom door. The room looked completely normal. Bed made, curtains closed, everything tidy the way Corinne kept it. But the smell was stronger in there, significantly stronger. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, and that's when I noticed the closet door. It was open about 2 inches. Not wide open, just barely cracked. And I absolutely knew that it had been closed when I checked the room the night before. I stood there with my phone, light aimed at that closet door for probably 30 seconds, and then Biscuit appeared at my side. He pressed his whole body against my leg and let out a single low whine. I did not open that closet. I walked out of the room, out of the house, and I locked the door behind me. I took Biscuit with me. I drove him to my house, and I sat in my driveway with the doors locked for 15 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The next morning I called Corinne. She didn't answer. I texted her. No response for almost 2 hours, which wasn't like her. When she finally called me back, I told her what had happened. The smell, the closet, all of it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then she told me to call the police and not go back inside. Turns out, Corinne had a restraining order against her ex-husband. She hadn't told me because she said she didn't think it mattered for a 4-day trip. She genuinely believed he had no idea she was gone, but somehow he'd found out, and somehow he had a key. Police found evidence that someone had been in that closet. He'd been in that house. He'd been there while I was sleeping on her couch, while I walked her hallway in the dark, while I stood 5 feet from that door in the middle of the night. He was long gone by the time they arrived, but the evidence of what he'd left behind told them he hadn't just been there that night. He'd been in and out of that house for longer than any of us wanted to think about. Karen never went back to that house. She packed what she needed a week later with a police escort and moved in with her sister. I still have the key she gave me. I keep meaning to throw it away, but every time I reach for it in my junk drawer, I think about that night, about standing in that dark doorway with my phone light cutting across the room, about that closet door, cracked open just 2 inches, about how Biscuit knew before any of us did, and spent 2 days trying to warn me the only way he could. If you've ever agreed to watch someone's house while they were out of town, you might want to hear this before you say yes again. I was 23, between jobs, a little desperate for cash, and when my neighbor Hank offered me $200 to watch his place for a long weekend, feed his dog, grab the mail, make sure nothing went sideways, I said yes without a second thought. Hank was a quiet guy, kept to himself mostly, but always waved when he saw me. Normal enough. His house was a brick ranch on a dead-end street in rural Kentucky, about 20 minutes outside of Lexington. I'd driven past it 100 times. Nothing about it ever felt off. He left on a Thursday morning, gave me a spare key, a sheet of handwritten instructions, and told me his dog, Rex, a big, older German shepherd, would mostly just sleep and eat. "He's lazy," Hank said, laughing a little. "You'll barely know he's there." Then he climbed into his truck and drove off. I showed up that evening around 6. The house was quiet when I unlocked the front door. Rex came padding over slowly, tail wagging low, and sniffed my hand before heading back to his spot near the couch. I fed him, checked the windows like Hank asked, grabbed a water from the fridge, and settled in. The plan was to watch some TV, sleep in the guest room, and head home in the morning. Simple. Around 9, I started noticing Rex acting strange. Not aggressive, not barking. He just kept lifting his head toward the hallway that led to the back of the house, not the front door, the back, the part of the house that faced the tree line. He'd stare down that hallway for a long moment, then put his head back down, then lift it again. I figured maybe an animal outside was catching his attention. Raccoon, possum, something like that. I didn't think much of it. I went to bed around 11. I woke up at 2:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone the second my eyes opened. Rex was standing at the foot of the bed, completely still, staring at the bedroom door. Not whining, not growling, just standing there with every muscle in his body locked tight. That dog had been half asleep all evening, and now he looked like a completely different animal. I sat up slowly. "Rex," I whispered. He didn't move. Then I heard the back door. Not a knock, not a bang, just the soft sound of a door handle being tested, the slow mechanical click of someone pressing down on a latch and letting it back up. Once, twice. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and I sat there in the dark trying to think clearly. I told myself it was the wind, an old house settling, but Rex hadn't moved an inch, and that dog knew this house better than I ever would. I called 911. I kept my voice low, told them what I heard, told them the address. The dispatcher told me to stay in the room, lock the door if I could, and stay on the line. I pushed a dresser, not a heavy one, but something in front of the door. Rex finally moved. He came and stood right beside me. I don't know how long I sat there. It felt like an hour, but the dispatcher told me later it was about 12 minutes before the first patrol car arrived. What the deputies found was this. The back door had been tampered with. The lock mechanism showed fresh scratch marks consistent with someone trying to manipulate it from the outside. The screen on the back window closest to the door had been cut, cleanly, deliberately, and folded back. Whoever was out there wasn't testing the door out of curiosity. They were working it. They found boot prints in the soft dirt behind the house leading out toward the tree line. They followed them a short distance, but lost them where the ground hardened. No one was found that night. The deputies walked the perimeter, checked the outbuildings, and stayed for about 40 minutes. One of them told me, without a lot of emotion, that the area had seen a string of burglaries over the past few months, homes being cased when the owners were away. They said whoever was doing it had been careful. No forced entries, no confrontations. Just people coming home to find things missing, electronics, cash, small valuables. I called Hank first thing in the morning. He came back early. What he told me when he got home was the part that stuck with me. He said this wasn't the first time something felt off around his property. A few weeks before, he'd come home to find his back gate unlatched, and he was certain he'd locked it. Another time, his truck had been moved. Just slightly. Enough that he noticed, but not enough that he could be sure he hadn't done it himself. He hadn't said anything to anyone because he thought he was imagining it. He wasn't imagining it. Someone had been watching that house for a while, learning the patterns, figuring out the routine. And the moment Hank left and a stranger showed up, someone who didn't know the layout, didn't know the neighborhood, didn't know what was normal, they figured it was time to make their move. The sheriff's department made an arrest about 3 weeks later, a man in his late 30s with a record going back years. They connected him to at least 6 properties in the area. They never told me specifically what would have happened if he'd gotten inside that night, and I didn't ask. But I've thought about it. I've thought about the fact that I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have a plan. I was alone in a house I didn't know, in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. And the only reason I'm sitting here telling you this story is because of a dog who refused to go back to sleep. I was 23 years old, fresh out of college, picking up odd jobs while I figured out what to do with my life. Pet sitting paid decent money for almost no effort, or at least, that's what I thought. A family friend named Donna reached out through my mom. She had a dog she needed watched for 5 days while she and her husband took a trip to Portland. The dog's name was Remy, a Belgian Malinois. Donna said he was trained, calm, and well-behaved. She said it like it was a fact, the kind of fact that turns out to be completely wrong. I showed up at her house on a Friday evening. Nice neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio. Clean streets, big yards, the kind of place where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Donna met me at the door, handed me a sheet of instructions, and spent about 4 minutes introducing me to Remy before she and her husband grabbed their bags and left. 4 minutes. That's all the time she had for a handoff between a trained working-breed dog and a guy whose only dog experience was a beagle he had growing up. Remy sat in the living room and stared at me, not the curious kind of stare, the flat, assessing kind, like he was deciding something. The first night was fine. He ate. He went outside. He slept. I started to think Donna was right, easy dog, easy money. Saturday changed that. I let Remy out into the backyard around 7 in the morning. The yard was fully fenced, solid wood, 6 feet high. I watched him through the sliding glass door while I made coffee. He ran the perimeter twice, then stopped at the far left corner and stood there, completely still. I figured he smelled a squirrel or something. I went back to the kitchen. When I came back 10 minutes later, Remy was gone. My stomach dropped. I went outside, walked the entire fence line. There was a gap at the base of the left corner, maybe 8 inches of space where the fence had separated from the post. Just enough. I don't know how I missed it. I spent the next 2 hours walking the neighborhood calling his name. Nothing. I drove slowly through every street within a half-mile radius. I knocked on 3 doors and described him. Nobody had seen him. I called Donna. No answer. I left a voicemail trying to keep my voice steady and failing. I went back to the house and sat on the couch trying to figure out my next move. An hour passed. Then I heard scratching at the back door. Ramai was sitting on the patio like nothing happened. I let him in, heart pounding, relieved and furious at the same time. I checked him over, no injuries, no blood, nothing obviously wrong. I patched the fence gap with a board from Donna's garage and told myself it was over. It wasn't. That night around 11, I woke up to a sound I couldn't immediately place. A low, continuous noise coming from somewhere in the house. I lay still for a second trying to identify it. It was Ramai, not barking, not whining, growling, deep and quiet, the kind that seems to come from somewhere low in the chest. I got up and found him at the front door, body rigid, nose pressed to the gap at the bottom. I looked through the peephole. The porch was empty. The street was quiet. Every light in the neighborhood was off. I told myself it was a raccoon, a car, something mundane. I went back to bed. The growling stopped. Sunday, Donna finally called back. I explained the fence situation, kept it factual, told her I'd patched it. She sounded annoyed but not panicked. She said he'd never done that before. She said he was protective, and I should just make sure he stayed inside at night. That instruction would have been helpful 3 days earlier. Monday was when things stopped making sense. I took Ramai for a walk in the morning. Normal route, quiet streets. About 4 blocks out, he stopped in front of a white van parked on the curb. Not unusual, dogs stop, dogs sniff. But Ramai didn't sniff. He stood parallel to the van, head low, every muscle locked up. That same growl, quiet and certain. I looked at the van. The windows were tinted. It looked empty. I started walking again, gave the leash a light tug. Ramai didn't move. I pulled harder. He turned and followed me, but he kept looking back the entire walk home. That afternoon, I noticed the van parked 2 streets over. I told myself it was a coincidence. Columbus is a big city. White vans are everywhere. That night around midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, just 4 words. "That's a nice dog." I stared at the screen for a long time. I went to every window in the house and checked the locks. I checked the back door. I left every light on. I called the number back. It rang once and went to voicemail. Generic, no name. I didn't sleep. I texted Donna at 6 in the morning and told her everything, the van, the text, all of it. She called me immediately. She told me her neighbor had mentioned a white van circling the block twice the previous week. She hadn't thought anything of it at the time. By Tuesday afternoon, she'd cut the Portland trip short. She and her husband were back by 7 that evening. I don't know what that van was. I don't know who sent that text. The number was disconnected when I tried again the next day. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was exactly what it felt like. What I do know is that Ramai heard something I couldn't on Friday night. He sensed something outside that door that I couldn't see through the peephole. And every time I try to convince myself I was just paranoid, I come back to those 4 words. That's a nice dog. These are 3 pet-sitting horror stories. Drop a comment below and tell me which one got under your skin the most. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss next horror stories. I will see you in the next video. Until next time, stay safe out there.